The sudden November afternoon rain made the small street quieter than usual. Streaks of water running down the windowpane formed a blotchy, hazy painting, like a curtain veiling the city's noisy sounds. Amidst that scene, a small café still glowed warmly with soft yellow lights. Inside, the scent of freshly ground coffee drifted through the air, blending with the smell of wood and the gentle notes of jazz. It was Emma's place, a little café built with Emma's own hands. The young woman, with bright eyes and a faint but rarely full smile, was used to carrying everything on her own cleaning tables, roasting beans, keeping accounts. To Emma, every drop of sweat was proof of freedom and pride, because she never wanted to rely on anyone but herself. That afternoon, just as Emma set a pot of hot coffee on the counter, the cafe door swung open. The soft chime of the wind bell signaled a stranger's arrival. He stepped inside, tall and slender, his dark coat wet with rain, his shoes covered in dust. His hair, slightly damp, gave him a weary look, but his eyes, deep and bright, made Emma glance up once more. "Welcome to Emma's place," she said, her voice as calm as any other day. The man hesitated for a moment before replying, "1 black coffee, please." Emma nodded and quickly set to work. The soft, dripping sound of coffee falling into the porcelain cup filled the quietness with comfort. She placed the cup before the guest, and at that moment, he let out a sheepish smile, slipping his hand into his coat pocket before sighing. I'm really sorry. It seems I've forgotten my wallet." Emma paused, her brows gently furrowing. She had met her fair share of strange customers, but this man's candor left her unsure how to react. "You mean you'd like to put it on a tab?" Her tone was still polite, but tinged with firmness. The man nodded his smile, a little helpless. "If you allow me, I'll come back tomorrow and pay in full." Emma looked straight into his eyes. That gaze, it didn't resemble deceit, but it wasn't enough to sway the principles she had set from the day she opened the cafe. "Sorry, but we don't offer credit here. If you don't have money, I can't sell it." Silence lingered for a moment. Outside, the rain still drummed on the awning. The man looked at the steaming cup before him, then smiled, not angrily, not condescendingly, but as though he had stumbled upon an unexpected amusement. "I understand. Well then, thank you for being honest with me." He turned, walked out into the rain, leaving behind a cup of coffee untouched. Emma followed his fading figure through the curtain of rain, a faint unease stirring within her. Not everyone could smile like that when being refused. She told herself, perhaps he was just a passerby. Tomorrow I won't see him again. Little did Emma know, her firm decision that day had unknowingly opened the door to another story. One where her resolve touched the heart of a man carrying a tremendous secret. A man who was not merely a stranger in the rain, but a hidden billionaire searching for something far more precious than money. The next morning, as the first sunlight lingered on the window frame, Emma was wiping down the counter when the wind chime rang once more. She looked up and froze for a moment. The man from yesterday, with the same slightly weary demeanor but bright eyes, had returned. This time, he wasn't drenched from the rain. Instead, he looked neat in a simple, light blue shirt. In his hand was a leather wallet, and as soon as he sat at the familiar table by the window, he smiled at Emma. "Sorry for the inconvenience yesterday," he said, sincerely placing 2 bills on the counter. One for yesterday and one for today. Emma was momentarily surprised. She had thought she would never see the stranger again. His gaze was nothing like the careless look of the wealthy, who were used to spending easily. On the contrary, it resembled someone who truly cherished each moment. "You don't have to pay double," Emma replied with a faint smile. "No one drank the coffee yesterday." The man shook his head, his eyes gentle. "No, I owe you a thank you, and your coffee is worth more than that." The simple words made Emma pause. She wasn't used to flattery, but in his voice, she heard no trace of falsehood. From that day on, his presence became a familiar part of the cafe. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would sit in the same small corner, by the window, the 2-person table always spotless, as if Emma had quietly reserved it just for him. At first, their conversations revolved around the smallest things. "The coffee is a little stronger than yesterday," he remarked one morning. Emma raised an eyebrow, half teasing. "Are you complaining?" "No," he laughed. "I think I like it stronger. It feels like a little extra strength to start the day." Another time, they spoke about morning routines. I usually go jogging, but lately, I've been coming here instead. I guess I've gotten lazy, he said. Emma shook her head. Not really. You just traded one habit for another. Some people find energy in their running shoes, others in a cup of coffee. Gradually, the conversations grew deeper about dreams, about places they longed to visit, about the simple kind of life people often forget amid the rush of the city. Emma realized that this man, his name was Daniel, was somehow different. He didn't brag, never talked about work, and lacked the hurried demeanor of successful men she had met before. On the contrary, he could even be a little clumsy, spilling sugar when stirring his coffee or forgetting to grab napkins. And yet, that very clumsiness made him feel closer, more real. One quiet afternoon, with the cafe nearly empty, Daniel gently asked Emma, "Why did you choose to open a cafe on such a small street?" She paused, then smiled softly. "Because I wanted a place where people could truly stop. A place where they could sit down, breathe slowly, and realize how gently a day can pass." Daniel nodded, his eyes seeming to brighten. "Maybe that's why I came back. I can't remember the last time I stopped. Really stopped." Emma looked at him, sensing a strange stillness, as if his words carried more than he let on. But she didn't ask. Sometimes silence is also a way of listening. And so, day after day, Daniel kept returning. The little cafe that had once been just a passing stop slowly became something special. Not only for him, but also for Emma, because she began to realize that amidst the noise and bustle of life, there are encounters so strange that people call them destiny. And, for Emma, destiny was now sitting at the small table by the window, sipping coffee, leaving behind in her heart an echo she couldn't quite explain. That morning, the cafe was livelier than usual. A few regulars were scattered about chatting, while Emma busied herself with the coffee machine. Daniel, as always, had taken his usual spot by the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating his face, making him appear at once ordinary and unfathomable. As Emma carried out his coffee, an older gentleman at the next table glanced toward Daniel and suddenly murmured, "Isn't that Daniel Carter, the man behind Carter Technologies?" Emma froze, mid-step, startled. The man, a middle-aged businessman who often visited the cafe, lowered his voice, though his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "I've seen him in Forbes magazine. That's him. It has to be." The whispered words fell like a pebble into a calm lake. Emma turned toward Daniel, who lifted his cup of coffee and smiled. He neither denied nor confirmed. Just a smile, so composed, so untroubled, it was almost disarming. When the curious customers left, Emma stood behind the counter, her mind racing. A billionaire, the head of a tech empire. How could that title possibly belong to the same man, in a simple shirt, who sometimes forgot napkins and spilled sugar on the table? At last, she walked over her voice, carrying its usual honesty. Someone said, "You're Daniel Carter. Is that true?" Daniel looked up, his eyes glinting with something ungraspable. He set down his cup, tilted his head, as if weighing his words, and then simply smiled. "If I truly were wealthy, Emma, would you treat me any differently?" The unexpected question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then let out a soft laugh. "I don't care who you are. The only thing that matters to me is that you never leave your coffee unpaid again." Daniel laughed aloud, a sound tinged with both helplessness and relief. Such a simple statement, yet it pierced a place deep inside him. A place that had long forgotten what it was like to be seen as a man, not as a glittering name on a magazine cover. "Emma," he said softly, his tone suddenly low and steady, "do you realize this is the first time in years someone has spoken to me without mentioning money companies or fame?" She tilted her head, her gaze warm and curious. "Maybe that's because to me, coffee matters more than all of those things." For a long while, Daniel sat in silence, as if memorizing each word she spoke. His thoughts wandered to crowded boardrooms, billion-dollar contracts, countless handshakes that meant nothing. None of those people ever looked at him the way Emma did, lightly, simply, sometimes, even sternly. That night, after closing time, Emma tidied the table where Daniel had sat. A faint sprinkle of sugar still clung to the wood. She sighed softly, recalling his question. "If I truly were wealthy, would you treat me any differently?" In that moment, Emma realized she was being drawn into something strange. Daniel wasn't like any other customer. He came and went like an ordinary man, yet around him there was always a glow that couldn't be hidden. The next morning, when Daniel walked in, Emma was waiting. If you really are the man they say you are, then why do you come to this little cafe every day? Daniel paused before the counter, his eyes fixed on hers. Then he answered quietly, because here I can be myself. No titles, no masks, just a man and a cup of coffee. The simplicity of his reply sent a tremor through Emma's heart. She wasn't sure whether to believe him, but one thing was certain. This man was nothing like the billionaires she had ever imagined. And from that day on, each time Daniel came, Emma found herself watching him more closely. A man who might be a billionaire, yet still laughed clumsily when he spilled sugar, listened intently as she explained how to choose beans, and sometimes sat in silence, gazing at the rain beyond the window. Inside, Emma, a quiet stirring began to grow, though she refused to name it. And within Daniel, Emma's unyielding honesty became a rare kind of light, making him believe that perhaps true love could exist beyond the dazzling world he once thought was all there was. Daniel sat in the small cafe where the scent of roasted coffee mingled with the sound of rain falling outside the window. The warm yellow light reflected on his face, the very face that the press had once praised as the perfect heir to a billion-dollar empire. But here, there were no flashing cameras, no supercars, no lavish parties. There was only a very different Daniel, a man slowly learning how to relax, how to listen. Emma quickly wiped the soap from her hands and walked closer. She was slightly surprised to see that Daniel was no longer glued to his phone or laptop. Instead, his eyes were following the falling raindrops, filled with quiet thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. Daniel turned to her, his deep eyes holding back an entire sky of emotions. He drew in a long breath, then said slowly, "About my childhood. Perhaps I've never told this to anyone except the therapists my family hired. They listened because it was their job, not because they cared." Emma remained silent, only nodding as if to encourage him. "I was born into a family so wealthy that everything was arranged for me. But the price of abundance was loneliness. My parents were always away on business trips, endless parties and conferences. The only thing I had was a large room, shiny but cold. I grew up surrounded by luxury, but no one ever truly listened to my heart." His gaze drifted off, as though he were staring back at those distant childhood days. "I used to wish, just once, that I could live like an ordinary child, to go on a picnic with my parents, or simply sit down for dinner at a small wooden table. But that never became reality." His voice sank lower, dissolving into silence. Emma suddenly felt a pang in her chest. The man in front of her, the one the world believed had everything, had grown up with such emptiness. She set the cleaning cloth aside and smiled gently. "You know, I was the opposite. I lost my parents when I was very young. Since then, this cafe has been both my home and the place I held onto just to survive. I learned to be strong, to carry everything on my shoulders, simply to exist. But because of that, I realized something: happiness doesn't come from money. Happiness comes from having someone who truly cares about you." Daniel stayed silent. Her words were like a key unlocking within him a fierce longing to live simply, to be loved like an ordinary man. From that day on, their relationship slowly began to change. In the days that followed, the small cafe became the place where Daniel learned how to touch the ordinary. He awkwardly climbed onto a chair to fix a flickering light bulb, nearly falling, because he wasn't used to such things. Emma laughed, torn between worry and warmth. "Be careful. If a billionaire falls, the newspapers will have a field day." Daniel smiled softly. "But if I fall here, only you would witness it. And I think that would be the luckiest thing." Emma blushed, lowering her gaze to wipe a spotless table just to avoid his eyes. Sometimes, Daniel rolled up his sleeves to wash cups, leaving wet streaks across the wooden counter. He wasn't skillful at all yet. Emma felt her heart tremble as she watched his focused expression. He was nothing like the sharp, untouchable businessman on magazine covers. One afternoon, after most of the customers had left, Emma set a cup of coffee in front of him. Steam rose, carrying a deep, rich aroma. "Try it," she said. Daniel took a sip, his eyes widening in surprise. It's exactly my taste. How did you know? Emma smiled mysteriously. You just have to pay attention. People reveal what they like through their eyes, their gestures. And you aren't that hard to read. In that moment, Daniel felt a genuine care he had never once received in the dazzling world outside. And yet, as the distance between their hearts grew smaller, Emma chose to draw an invisible line. One late night, as they were cleaning up, Daniel suddenly said, Emma, have you ever thought that maybe we... She cut him off, her voice steady, but her eyes trembling. Don't, Daniel. I don't want to live in illusions. Your world and mine are too different. I'm just an ordinary woman trying to keep this little cafe alive. And you belong to a world I could never step into. Daniel looked at her for a long time. He wanted to argue, to say he was willing to give it all up just to be with her. But his lips only quivered, and he remained silent. Emma turned away, though her heart was pounding wildly. She knew the closeness between them was real. But could a fairy tale truly exist in reality? Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside the cafe, two souls sat across from each other, so near, yet so far, like an unfinished melody, waiting for a soaring note to rise and become love. That morning, when Emma opened the cafe door, a strange gust of wind swept in. She barely noticed it until she caught the curious glances of a few regular customers. They weren't looking at her. They were staring at the newspaper lying on the table. The front page blazed with a bold headline, Daniel Lancaster, young billionaire, heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, returns after an extended business trip. Just below was a sharp, glossy photo, Daniel, in a tailored suit, smiling calmly, shaking hands with the elite. Emma froze, her heart clenched as though gripped by an invisible hand. That name, that face, unmistakable. It was Daniel, the same man who just yesterday had clumsily washed glasses in her small cafe. She remembered the time she had asked softly, "Who are you really? I think I've heard the name Daniel Carter before." Back then he had stayed silent, evasive, giving her only a faint smile, as if he didn't want to say more. Emma had brushed it off, thinking it was just coincidence. But now, with the truth laid bare, she felt foolish. Daniel walked into the cafe at that very moment. He immediately noticed the pale look on Emma's face. Her eyes were no longer warm, but cold, as though a wall had risen between them. "Emma," he called gently, his voice hesitant. She set the newspaper down on the table, her voice trembling heavy with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? I trusted you. I thought you were just a regular man, searching for some peace. But I was blind, wasn't I?" Daniel stepped closer, his eyes full of pleading. "No, Emma, please listen to me. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted for once in my life to be seen as an ordinary man. Not as a walking wallet, not as a name tied to money and power." Emma clenched the rag in her hand, her eyes glistening with restrained tears. "But I deserve the truth, Daniel. I don't need you to bring me the world. I only need honesty. And yet you let me live in an illusion." Her words cut into him like blades. Daniel lowered his head, exhaling heavily. "I'm sorry. I truly am. But if I had told you from the start, would you have believed that I came to this cafe simply to be myself? Or would you have thought I was only curious, only toying with a smaller world?" Emma turned away, saying nothing. She was afraid that if she looked at him longer, her heart would soften, forgiving him even as her reason screamed, "Don't." In the days that followed, the cafe grew quieter. Emma no longer saw Daniel waiting at his usual corner. And yet, every morning, when she opened the doors, she found an unpaid bill, resting on the table, scribbled with the same messy line, "I'm still here, Emma." She picked it up silently, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He came quietly, drank a cup of coffee, and left without waiting for her greeting. A strange patience, like he wanted to prove his feelings were no game. One evening after closing, Emma sat alone. The cafe lights cast her shadow across the tiled floor. She remembered Daniel's clumsy attempts at wiping tables, fixing light bulbs, smiling sheepishly, when scolded for his awkwardness. Was that foolish, endearing side of him all an act? Tears slipped down before she realized it. She whispered to herself, "Why does it have to be you? Why did you make my heart stir, only to shatter my trust right after?" Outside, the city remained bustling. the press still roaring with headlines about Daniel Lancaster's billion-dollar deals. But inside the small cafe sat a girl, her heart torn between anger and longing. Daniel across the city was no better. He sat in his luxurious penthouse, staring out at the night sky, glittering with city lights. Everything should have satisfied him: power, wealth, respect. Yet all of it was hollow without Emma. He remembered her eyes, the rich aroma of coffee only she could brew to his taste. He remembered her playful scolding. "If you keep washing cups like that, I'll have to buy 10 new ones." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Perhaps he had been too greedy, trying to keep both worlds. But now he wanted only one thing: for Emma to understand that his feelings were real. Late at night, a light drizzle tapped against the window, leaving shimmering streaks under the glow of the street lamps. Emma sat inside the closed cafe, quietly tidying up the register. The old drawer slid open, and something unexpected slipped out. A stack of receipts, the very ones Daniel had been leaving behind, each day receipts she hadn't even realized she had kept. Emma sat down, her hands trembling as she turned them over one by one. Each bill showed the familiar price of a single cup of coffee. But in the corner, Daniel had scrawled small notes: "Thank you for listening to me. 1 cup of coffee, but a whole day made. I wish today's rain would last longer, so I'd have an excuse to stay here a little more." Her chest tightened, and then she reached the final slip. There was no number on it, only a line written in firm, steady strokes: "This is the only bill I cannot pay, because it is my heart, and I only wish to give it to you." Emma's tears spilled over. All the anger, doubt, and the gulf of status between them dissolved like hot coffee into sugar. She finally understood from beginning to end. Daniel had never hidden his feelings. He had simply chosen the clumsiest, most foolish way to prove them through scraps of paper that others would dismiss as worthless. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Emma sprang up, driven by an unshakable impulse. She rushed out the door, her heart pounding. And just as her instincts told her, Daniel was there, standing alone in the downpour, his shirt clinging to him, his hair dripping wet. But his eyes, bright, unwavering, held nothing but her, as though nothing else in the world mattered. "Daniel." Emma called, her voice breaking through the rain. He looked up, lips pale, but still smiling. "I'm sorry. I didn't know any other way but to stand here, waiting until you chose to open your heart." Emma ran to him, her trembling arms wrapping around his soaked frame. Rain and tears blurred together, but this time she no longer cared. This time, she whispered against his ear, "I'll let you stay in debt. Forever." Daniel pulled her tighter, his heartbeat racing as if it might burst. For the first time in his life, he felt truly wealthy. Not because of the money in his accounts, but because he was loved as an ordinary man. The next morning, the little cafe opened again, but the air was different. Emma stood behind the counter, while Daniel stood beside her, awkwardly learning how to brew coffee from her hands. No, you put in too much ground coffee," Emma laughed, correcting his clumsy motions. Daniel grimaced, pretending to complain. "I swear, making coffee is harder than running a corporation." Emma tilted her head, her eyes sparkling with laughter. "Good. At least here, you're not a CEO, just my trainee." Daniel smiled, replying softly, "If it means being with you every day, I'll happily be a trainee for life." The rich aroma of coffee filled the space, and the small cafe transformed into a warm little world where every distance disappeared. A tiny family born from a single unpaid bill. In fairy tales, love is often written in grand vows and splendor, but here, between the worn walls of a modest cafe and a stack of old receipts, love was etched through honesty and patience. Emma realized she hadn't just found a man, she had found a home in Daniel's heart. And Daniel knew that this time, he no longer had to live 2 lives. He only needed one, the life that had Emma in it. And as they smiled together over their morning cups of coffee, the story closed like a gentle melody, a love that rose above wealth, above judgment, only to settle in the simplest place of all each other's hearts.